Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Writers Drinking Whiskey, the show where even James Joyce would say, "Hey, that's some effing gibberish and incoherent stuff, lad. I don't know what you're doing with your life." I'm Irish. Please forgive that horrible Irish accent. I am, of course, your host, William R. Hincy, and I am honored, thrilled today to have author Michael Branch with me at the Whiskey Bar. Mike, welcome to the bar.
Hey, this is a legendary podcast. The few, the proud, the drinkers who write and the writers who drink. I'm happy to be with you. Thanks for the invitation.
Very good. And I'll give you the brief introduction here. It says, and then I'll let you take it and fill in anything that important that I missed. But so you've got 10 books published, including the Pulitzer Prize nominated John Muir's Last Journey, South to the Amazon and East to Africa. Your most recent book was On the Trail of the Jackalope. And, finally, some hard science on a mysterious, horned bunny friend. And then there, and what I love is the quote, and I forget which book it was for. Maybe it was for Jackalope, but it's the perfect quote for an author to be on this show is, if Thoreau drank more whiskey and lived in the desert, he'd write like this. So
yeah. I was deeply honored. The greatest review line of all time. So
that is a great one.
Any number of panning reviews when you get just a moment like that.
Very good. Yeah, that was a great one. I was really happy to see that. I hope someone says something similar, just the whiskey part. Like if Hemingway drank just a little too much, he would write like this. And I'd be like, oh, there I am. I'm incoherent.
I mention whiskey so often in my books that I have actually had people write in through my website and say, "Hey, I really love your work, but I know you're a father and I'm really concerned about you. And I wonder if maybe you need some help." And I sort of have to explain, well, even nonfiction has a narrator and my narrator drinks more than I do. So it's okay, I swear, but you wouldn't know it from the books.
Right. And I might start getting comment sections on this show going, we're a little concerned. Maybe you need to cut back the show a little here. Awesome. So I wonder then that I tried to get the highlights that I've gotten off your website, but is there anything I can't even speak now. Anything else you'd like to mention? Just kind of your author journey leading up till today?
Yeah, the Freudian slip on ice says that you're thinking more about our cocktail than about this conversation. No, that's a fine introduction. My writing is creative nonfiction, has an environmental emphasis, and I'm also a humor writer. So a lot of the work that I do has to do with the Great Basin Desert, where I live in Nevada. And I'm really interested in the relationship between people and landscapes, especially as those relationships can be mediated by their families. I write a lot about my family and my kids, which is a little unusual for an environmental writer. And so, yeah, I'm interested in humor work. I'm interested in place-based nonfiction, and I'm interested in writing about family too. So that's kind of a shortcut into what I've been up to. And I also do a lot of popular science writing. So the Jackalope book has lots of folklore and mythology, but it also has lots of science, lots of nerdy stuff that I try to sneak in on people. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff that interests me. And I'm looking forward to chatting over a drink here.
Awesome. Very cool. And so that leads to the most important question of the show, which is, what are we drinking?
All right. Well, I have already sent you a recipe that I know you're going to post that I'll tell a quick story about, but then I'm going to make a different drink. But my book called Raising Wild, I was once being interviewed, and the last question that the interviewer asked was, if your book was a cocktail, what would it be? And it caused me to write this sort of, tongue-in-cheek literary recipe for a Raising Wild cocktail, which was published by Forward Reviews, and people are still out there drinking it. So you can post that for your listeners, but that's more of a summer cocktail. So what I'm about to mix is a Rye Manhattan, which sounds like a pretty straight ahead fare, but it is the gift that keeps on giving. So shall I go ahead then and prepare this drink?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so first of all, you'll want one of these. You can't tell from a distance, but this is chilled and needs to be. Coldness is a big part of this. So what we're going to do here, if you want to use a conventional jigger, that's acceptable, but I recommend a shot glass with one of the Three Stooges. That tends to work better, I find.
Okay.
The whiskey we're going to mix, a lot of people make Manhattans with bourbon, but my palate tends more to the spicy than the sweet. But because I just wrote a book on jackalopes, I'm going to be using this High West bourbon. The artwork on this whiskey comes from a mid-18th century European scientist who was in fact documenting a horned rabbit in his natural history book. In the medieval and Renaissance periods, Lepus cornutus, the rabbit with the crown, it was thought to be an actual independent species. So this booze is from the High West Distillery, and it is from Park City, Utah, which is a dry area. And I love the irony that people from dry counties tend to make great booze. The same is true of Jackalopes. In Lynchburg, if you want to make great booze for other people to get buzzed, make sure you stay sober. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a cocktail mixer. We've got some ice here. A great sound, isn't it? One of the great sounds in the natural world.
It is.
Okay, so we've got ice in our jigger and in our mixer. Now we're going to take our Three Stooges shot glass and put in 2 ounces of Boo Rye. And by the way, the reason this whiskey is called Boo Rye, it's a combination of bourbon and rye. And because this was a whiskey that the distillers in Park City at High West knew was going to be a hybrid whiskey, that was why they wanted to choose the Jackalope as their icon.
Very cool.
Hybrid animal to represent a hybrid whiskey. So I've just put 2 shots of this delicious High West Boo Rye whiskey into my mixer. Now I'm going to put in a little less than an ounce. I don't have much of a sweet tooth. If you do use a full ounce, this is Dubonnet. It's a sweet vermouth, a mid-19th century Paris vermouth, but I'm kind of a francophobe, so I would like to believe this was actually made in Hoboken. So we're going to put that in with the whiskey. And now what we're going to do is go to this excellent bitters. This is an orange bitters called Strong Water. This is a Colorado bitters. Plenty of bitter people in Colorado also. So I'm going to get my little dropper here, which makes this look super illicit, which makes it even more fun. I'm going to put that in as well. And then we're going to have a quick shake. The acoustics of cocktails are so important.
Right.
Pour into chilled glass. You have just a little bit of a sort of russet, muddied color. And then, before we begin, a cocktail cherry. I like these Peninsula cocktail cherries, but the key thing here is just don't ever use a maraschino cherry. It's just an abomination. Don't ever do that. Sweet tart cherry is fine. Tart cherry or sour cherry is fine, but never a maraschino. So in this goes with the pocket knife. And unlike an old fashioned, which when you're done mixing it, you should just walk away for a minute and let that drink think about itself before you sip it. This is a drink that won't wait. It has to be consumed chilly. So that's a Rye Manhattan, Nevada style. And I'd like to toast to you, Bill, and thanks again for having me with you. What are you drinking over there on your end?
Very good. I will share, but I have to toast you because we just said it. So let's take a drink of that while we're...
Cheers.
Oh, we're there. There we go.
Oh, wait, wrong side. Oh, there we go.
Over there.
Yeah, this is that's desperate.
Yeah.
Oh,
it was good. So
delicious.
right. What I got, because I think you had mentioned you were going to make you sent me the cool recipe for the drink, and you mentioned you would probably make a Rye Manhattan. So I wanted, though, to honor the hybrid Jackalope. So we were my wife and I were in Las Vegas this past weekend, and we wandered into this store with an easy name, but I keep forgetting it. There it is. Spirits and Spice and Everything Nice, of course, is the tagline, as you would expect. And the guy there that was helping us, it's just one of these stores with a bunch of whiskeys where you get to taste them and then you take the bottles home. They individually bottle them. And the guy's name was River, which is a unique name, but then also to contradict it being a unique name is also my niece's name. So I remembered, but we had a great time. He just kept having me taste so many. I don't even know how much money we spent. I just, my wife was like, "It's fine, just keep." And I'm like, "Okay, well, it's fine. I'm going." But they had this. If I can hold it here, it's a 2-bitch bourbon.
Wow.
And they also have these cool little pours here. This one with the horse head, which is my Chinese zodiac. But I think the 2 dogs with the horse essentially makes this a jackalope.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean that's good old school animal hybridity right out of the gate. You got the right idea.
Right. So I just have a little bit of this on the rocks,
Nice. I like that you
which is
left Las Vegas. I like that you left Las Vegas saying, "I don't know how much money we spent." I think you're not the first person to experience that emotion as you leave
oh
Vegas.
sure, yeah. Well, neither of us gamble, so
Mhm.
I actually we've gone. We didn't go for like 10 years. We're in LA, so it's just 3.5 hour drive from here.
Yeah,
But we didn't go for a good like 10 years. And then this
yeah,
year we've gone a few times. There was a couple of shows my wife wanted to see and things, so we've gone. I don't think we spent $1 gambling.
yeah,
So it's just eating and then booze. Like
yeah.
that's where
Right.
they.
And it's a good town for both. I'm up here in northern Nevada where the culture is completely different. But I don't gamble either, but I like it when I can go someplace and have great food and booze that's subsidized by gamblers. That works out great for me.
Exactly. And so actually that was going to be my next question. I like to ask where everybody is and where is the best place to get a drink there.
Oh, that's a great, great question. Well, for 16 years, I lived with my family in a really remote area of the desert out north of Reno, Nevada on the California line, where the elevation, the terrible roads, the weather, it was a challenge to get to town for a drink. But for the last couple of years, we've been in town here in Reno, although we live right on the edge of the national forest. So I'm up on the forest every day with my dog Huckleberry here. And so we're kind of living in the burbs now, but we're right up against wilderness. So we have a weirdly civilized life, but not too civilized. But there's increasingly, Reno is a great, great both beer and cocktail town. And hands down, my favorite place to get a great cocktail in Reno, Nevada is a place called Chapel Tavern. And you can imagine the devotion that those of us have when we go to chapel, which I will be doing
Sure.
again tomorrow afternoon. So that's my very favorite. Death and Taxes, also a good cocktail shop here. So it is now possible, as it was not when I moved here in the 90s, to get a great drink. But Chapel Tavern in Reno, Nevada, ask for Sean and tell him that Mike Branch sent you.
Awesome. Very good. I'll have to remember that. I haven't been to Reno yet. I'll have to make a trip up there one of these days. One of the things, and we'll get to Jackalope too, because I have some questions on that ornery Jackalopes. But one of the things I thought was super fun, and you've kind of mentioned your love of it already, but you had I'm just going to say the name. I can't think of how to place it. Rants on the Hill, which I think was, and you can tell my extensive research, right? Like I looked at your website, so like I've studied. Like I think anyone watching this show knows there's like I spend a lot of time, as all authors do, just studying things.
Of course,
But it consisted of 69 essays. It says on life and parenting in the high desert. I think it was worded more eloquently on your website, but this is me talking, so it's coming out how it comes out. So I wonder if maybe you could kind of set us up, maybe give us the background on that, and maybe we could dive into those essays a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Well, like I said, we had this wild experience, my wife and I, of raising our two daughters for 16 years out in this really remote area of the high desert. So we were on 50 acres with a half-mile long driveway, 6,000 feet, nothing but wildfires and earthquakes and blizzards, just really hard, intense, wild living. And we were one lot off of BLM, which is public lands, all the way to California. So essentially, in the desert wilderness. And part of what really fascinated me about that experience was that I started to see connections between my relationship to wild places and my relationship to my kids. And I started to kind of see a wildness in my kids and in the experience of parenting that seemed really new to me. And conversely, my kids were starting to kind of change my relationship to nature. And a lot of my humor work actually came out of that because, nothing can explode adult pretensions faster than a kid, right? A kid can call bullshit in a second. So, I had spent a long time developing this elaborate self-image of myself as an environmentalist and a wilderness guy and all this stuff. Then my kids would say, like, Dad, why do you say you believe this, but you do this? And it's like, okay, it all falls apart. And so the humor kind of came in reconciling that gap. But anyway, I started to get really fascinated with how my experience of the high desert was being so profoundly influenced by my experience in parenting, in particular, the way they both enforced an incredible humility. Like being in the desert and being a parent are two things that remind you constantly of your weakness and your inexperience and your vulnerability. And so I started to kind of explore that. And so High Country News, which is a magazine out here in the West, asked me if I wanted to start doing these essays as a monthly series. So for about 6.5 years, I wrote a monthly essay. It was always about life on what I called ranting hills. So these were called Rants from the Hill. And all 60, however many of these essays were these short, often comic essays about living in the high desert and about raising kids in the high desert. And a couple of books eventually came out of those. But it was really a cool experience to have that occasion every month to sort of meditate maybe on something new I had learned about my high desert environment, but also to be able to keep poking fun at myself for how much I didn't know and how much my kids were teaching me. So that was kind of where the series came from. And it really helped to shape my sense of myself in relationship to the desert and my kids. It was a cool experience.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like it. And it always reminds me too, and maybe because I have the 4 kids, I actually not as isolated desert, but I grew up in high desert. Grew up in Palmdale, California, which anyone that kind of knows the landscape with LA, if you think of the Rose Bowl and they show the mountains behind it all the time, that's the San Gabriel Mountains. On the other side is high desert, and Palmdale, Lancaster. It's where I was reared. That's where I grew up. And it's grown a lot, especially since I was a kid. But you do that sense of humility and kind of learning from like, oh, you're out in the desert, and then you just go out a little bit and you realize, oh, I don't have water. Like how quickly, like you're like, oh, I need to head back. Like I can't keep going this way. I need to be back because it's 110 and I'm gonna melt right here. So I think it's interesting you mentioned that too. I think I've mentioned on the show before, but one of the things I really pride myself on isn't the right term. One of the things I aspire for is intellectual humility. And I think humility in all things, but especially intellectual, I always try to because the more you learn, right? The more you learned about your environment, the more you realize the less you know. Yeah. And so it's like, it's a weird inverse behavior. And that when you do, you start going like, okay, like whatever the political thing is, whatever it is, that people get very uppity and they know all the right answers, but then you start going, oh shit, I don't know the right answers.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. And I love that metaphor of an island of knowledge in a sea of ignorance. And the bigger you make that island, the more contact it has with that sea of ignorance. Like the smarter you get, the more you realize how little you know. And I love that feeling. I mean, to me, that's really important to writing. It's really important to engaging with environment, but also with family. But yeah, you're totally right. And the part of the desert you're from, you don't need to be told, you get it. Is, people talk about, well, you look at the stars at night and you think about how small you are. You look out over the ocean, and it seems so vast. And the desert is like that too. That sense of, this is the sagebrush ocean here, right? But there's also that sense that, I don't know, I mean, one way to put it, I guess, would be, I think as a species, we got ourselves in a heap of trouble by subscribing to the idea that we control the natural world. And that is an arrogant assumption that has caused us a ton of problems. So what I like about being in the high desert is it doesn't care about me in the slightest. There's nothing nurturing about that environment for a big mammal like me. And so I like just being reminded of the fact that, nature has agency. It has a will of its own. It's here for its own reasons, not just to serve my purposes. And I just think, humility can be a superpower if we really took it seriously, especially in our relationship to nature and to the people we love, started from the assumption that we don't know rather than that we do. I think it might result in some different assumptions, some different behaviors. And, I don't mean to sound like pedantic about it, but I just think as a species, we need a lot more of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's funny because it really hits with parenting too. right? Like
Yeah.
you, like I know everyone I know that hasn't had kids yet. I'm gonna do this with my kids. I'll never do that. You know, I'm like your kids. Like my kids have kids now, so I get the like laugh at them because I can see it. And they're like, I would never do that. Dad, you're awful. I would do this. And then you watch them. I'm like, all right, well.
Yeah.
God bless you. I don't give them the "I told you so" because then I'll just be like I'll be humbled again some way, and I know it. So I'm just like, whatever. This is playing out. I can enjoy the humor in this, but I can keep my mouth shut in this instance.
Yeah. No, you get it every day when you step into parenting. You know that you're in for a surprise that will show you your limitations. I mean, that's part of what's so challenging about it, and also so rewarding. Is just it's so rare to have that feeling like, yeah, I really nailed that. You know, the minute you think that, it's about to go off the rails.
That is sad. That is exactly how it is. Every single time I've gotten that, like, oh, I've got this. Like things are going really well. You're pumping the air, and then suddenly, like, everything's off the rails. You're like, oh, well, whatever. I wonder, was there a favorite rant from the Hill? Was there a certain essay that sticks out in your mind a little more than the others?
You know, not really so much, but I do think that the process of doing that series taught me a lot. One of the things it taught me was I had no experience in journalism where people are super deadline driven. And I had always kind of done my writing. It was done when I felt like it was done. But now I had this gig where, you know, there was a deadline for an essay every month. And a couple things were great about that. One is it really taught me to be more disciplined as a writer, not to subscribe to some idea of romantic inspiration. It's like, no, you got to have a bunch of ideas ready because it's time to crank this out. The second thing that was really cool about that series for me was I got to do a lot of natural history writing. I got to write a lot about the high desert, which I love, and yet blend it with humor. And so my subsequent books, which do a lot of environmental writing and a lot of humor writing together, that move of trying to braid those two strands is a little bit tough. And so I had a lot of practice doing it with that series. And then the third thing that was cool that I didn't see coming was, you know, for the first year or two, I just wrote about stuff that happened to me, like, oh, you know, here's the time I glissaded down this mountain, or here's the time there was a bobcat in the yard, or here's the time I built a treehouse with my kids. But then, you know, as I get into the third, fourth, fifth year, I started to reverse that order and say, what's a cool experience I can go have that would be really fun to write about? So I still wrote about stuff that was happening spontaneously, but increasingly it would be like, man, I've always wanted to take my daughters and try rolling down this giant sand dune. So I would go do it, and then I'd write a piece about it.
Right.
You know, so I'd come out of it with an essay, which was fun, but also with a life experience. And that kind of like paradigm shift has been helpful to me ever since. Don't just write about what happens. Use your writing to put yourself in a position to have cool experiences that you might not otherwise have. So I learned a ton from that. I don't have a particular favorite. I just like that I learned to practice blending essentially popular science writing with humor writing, and that emerged as a kind of voice for me that's been really comfortable since.
Sure. Yeah, no, and I love that thought of it too, to be proactive about it versus passive, right? Like, you know, you can do that in all life, but I think as writers, we don't think of it, right? You can think of it like, I don't want to be proactive all my life. I need to like proactive, but I think our writing a lot of times, this is what happened. You don't get to trigger it from happening or trigger it to happen. So I think that's important.
So sometimes when I'm talking with writers who are starting out and trying to craft a concept for a book idea, you know, instead of just focusing on the idea, I'll often say stuff like, well, where will you have to travel to do this? And do you want to go there? Who will you have to talk to? And are those the kind of people you want to talk to? What kind of research will you have to do? And does that really interest you? Because, you know, you take on a book project, you're going to be immersed in it sometimes for years. It needs to be something that's going to take you intellectually, spiritually, geographically, interpersonally to places that you really want to go. So I think that's important, you know, especially in a world where, you know, nobody's figured out how to sell a book in America. So if you're going to write one,
right.
you need to write it because you want to, because you're invested in it and you care about it. So yeah, it was a neat experience.
Right. Sure. What do you think it is? I mean, and maybe you already covered it with how the desert makes you kind of feel, humble and things. But is there anything else about the desert in particular that speaks to you so profoundly?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, part of it is that to go into this landscape of the Great Basin Desert, the highest, coldest, biggest desert in North America and the least inhabited one, you're going back in time essentially, because
Sure.
these landscapes in central Nevada where I spend a lot of my time, some of these places have a population density of 1.5, 2 people per square mile. That would have met the standard for wilderness in 1890 for unsettled frontier. So there's this idea, right, like the march of civilization across the continent. But when you double back and go not to the west that is California and Oregon and Washington, but to the Intermountain West, to the high desert West, I mean, there's nobody out there. So part of that is that opportunity for solitude is so different. And I don't necessarily mean it in like a super fuzzy Thoreauvian way, like go out there and have epiphanies, although that can happen too. It's mainly just a cool experience to feel like you're the speck in the landscape. I also really like the way the desert sort of hides in plain sight. It's actually a landscape with tons of biodiversity, but we don't really see that, in part because so many desert animals are nocturnal. And there's just a lot of amazing species and landscapes that are really highly specific to this environment that you can't see anywhere else. And so, yeah, we talked about that feeling of openness, of vulnerability, of humility. But I also really like the idea that, it does sound Thoreauvian, but like if you want to escape the vices of over-civilization and imagine what a landscape looked like 100 or 1,000 years ago, there aren't that many places in North America to do it anymore, and this is one of them. So I really value that it's so easy to get the noise of the world in your head, that you need a place to be able to go wherever you live to get that out a little bit. And this is a great place to do that. It's really helped. I'm wound pretty tight, and it's really helped me to be in a landscape that unwinds you so much.
Right. Well, it reminded me when I think it was about 19. Well, no, probably mid-20s. I became obsessed with hawks. And I'm living in Palmdale, and I just get this sudden, like very rabid, like I need to go watch every hawk and like raptors, every hawk, eagle, falcon, and that I can find. I need to go look at them and then take pictures, right?
Yeah.
And because the desert there, you need to either be out early, preferably get out early, because they're going to be out having breakfast. Nature's out having breakfast, and then it's gone for the day. I mean, until the evening, and then come out for dinner, right? I mean, and so even though I've never was a morning person, I started waking up before dawn, so I could be out right at dawn and go see, and especially during the winter, because then you get the wintering animals. And back east, the Midwest, you get a lot of places with the beautiful fall colors, right? We don't get it. We don't get it in LA. We don't get it in the high desert. Really, it's just the leaves fall, and the Joshua trees are still a Joshua trees. It is how it is, but you get that sense of the seasons passing through the behavior of the wildlife around you. And you have to take time out to go see it. They don't present themselves to you. You have to kind of go out and be still. Because, I found actually watching them, I was like, oh, see how they fly away. I was like, oh, if I stay here, that's probably going to come back in like a half hour. I don't need to go look anymore. I can stay here and just observe and watch this landscape that seems unchanging, but is in fact changing in little subtle ways all of the time if you just look out for it. So I grew later in life, because I'm growing up, like, the desert is horrible. Palmdale, I hate it here. Every other kid, is just ruining my life. And then later in life, grew to really appreciate like how beautiful it was and how rich it was, and just in a different way that was a little more special, actually, that you have to. It's easy to love a waterfall.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I love the way you put that, and I also really love your idea, Bill, of the idea that watching animals is not only a way of making ourselves more attentive and calmer and more focused, but also that it's a kind of clock, right? We're used to this clock. We're used to the clock of the sun every day. But there's this larger clock that's always working, a clock of the year, of the weather, of the movement of stars, but especially the movement of animals. I mean, that's one of the ways that we really mark time in the desert is who's here, what non-human beings are
Sure.
here, what are they doing?
Yeah.
And I also really like your idea, Bill, that, you think there's not much happening here until you start to really pay attention. And you had asked about, which of the rants I liked best. One that covered a concept that was really fun for me is I had an experience about, probably almost 15 years ago now, that I'd hurt my back. I was laid up for a few months and I was really frustrated with that because I'm a big walker. And my wife said, okay, well, when you're able to walk again, what do you want to do? And I said, I just want to walk and walk and walk. So I came up with this arbitrary idea that, and it is purely arbitrary, that I would walk 1,000 miles that year within a 10-mile radius of my house. And what was interesting about that experiment was, you would think like on big epic hikes and stuff, but 1,000 miles a year is less than 3 miles a day. So it didn't really require epic hikes, but it did require getting out there all the time. So if I had a long day of work and I came home and I didn't have my 3 miles in, then I hiked in the dark or by moonlight or I snowshoed or, whatever. And what I discovered was, and I've been doing that now for a long time. So I've walked like 25,000 miles within 10 miles of my house. And people say like, oh my, it's so repetitive. You're just doing the same thing over and over again. You're seeing the same thing. And I always say, no, I'm learning to see how different it is each time. So I'm getting a more intimate knowledge of the landscape for sure. I know, here's the place where pronghorn antelope are going to show up, or here's the place where a great horned owl is going to nest. But mainly what strikes me is the differences that you can essentially, I guess it's like the Heraclitus thing. You can't bathe in the same river twice, right? I cover this same ground, and yet depending on the day, the year, the season, and also how I changed, right? How my day went, how my year is going.
Sure.
I just love that idea of a ritual of repetition. I mean, after all, we would not say about our family, right? Wake up and say, well, shit, I've seen them every morning for the last 5 years. Why would I want to wake up and talk to them again? Because you build increased intimacy and that bond becomes more meaningful over time. So that experiment, John Muir once took this famous walk from Indianapolis to the Gulf of Mexico and called it my 1,000-mile walk to the Gulf. And I'd always been inspired by that when I was younger, like, I want to go walk 1,000 miles. But I always assumed it would be here to someplace 1,000 miles away. And then I realized, no, I want to walk thousands and tens of thousands of miles, but I want to do it right here on my home landscape. And I want to see it in all weathers, in all conditions, in all times of the day and year. And what I discovered was it really honed my ability to see things. And the idea that I would ever be bored out there just seems insane now to me. But that was a cool experience to write about too, that ritual of going back onto the land in this really kind of ritualistic way and going to the same place and learning how to see it differently.
Sure. That reminds me too. We had John Lane who put us in contact. Who's I'll link his episode up with our show, but is it already out by the time this is going? But by the time recording, his has already been released. Had talked about that. I think he walked within a 1 mile radius of his house. He had done that for I think it was a year, if I'm remembering right. And so I think that's powerful. I tend to do that. I really like mountain biking, and so. But what I've started to do is I go ride almost the same course. I do sometimes I like to increase my stamina. So sometimes I go a little longer, but I kind of like to go the same places and you just see things. And there's like that ritual to it and things. And then so I kind of go and people are like, oh, don't you get bored? And I have some friends I'll ride with occasionally and I'll go when they want to go somewhere, I'll go out and ride with them and that'll be fun. But it is when you first started talking about that, it reminded me of, well, you don't say that about like your wife, right? I mean, maybe some people, well, you're not saying Mary Long. Definitely not saying that. But like you realize, and I think my wife, Claire, and I have been married, I shouldn't stammer on this, 13 years. How old's my son? 13 years. We've been married 13 years this year. And I think it was probably last year, maybe 2 years ago, that then I really started to appreciate that daily ritual of it. Like I appreciated her. I love her to death, but I started to appreciate like, oh, you really start just seeing this person. And yeah, she's a little different. It's the same person, but that does change. And like, it's interesting kind of seeing that and kind of end up, and you really see it with kids. Cause I've told all of them, it's like, you love this baby and that baby leaves you. That person's gone and that's a toddler and you love that toddler. And this series of people you love that leave you, and they leave you with a new person you love, but you never get that person back, you know? But it's beautiful to see that change. And with kids, it's really easy to see the change because it's so apparent, right? The size, everything, language, everything. But with your loved ones, like your wife and things, it's slower. Your brother or sister is a lot slower, but it's still happening. You know, things are still happening. You just pay a little attention to it.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way you put that about kids, right? Because there's a kind of exhilaration in watching them move through those phases, but also there's a kind of melancholy, right? That, okay, that kid at that age will never come back. And because I've written a lot about my kids, a lot of times people will read my books, and then when I do gigs, they'll come up and talk to me, and they imagine my girls the ages they were when I wrote about them, right?
Sure.
And so they'll, you know, it's hard for the readers even sometimes to say she's how old, you know, because picture her picking up a scorpion for the first time, or, you know, building a tree house or whatever. But yeah, you're right. And I think I've been married 23 years and I love it. And I think the longer you do something like that, I think you're right. The more, and this comes back to humility in some ways, right? The more, it's not the spectacular stuff that's most important. It's the daily stuff. It's that ritual of repetition that just becomes richer and richer over time. So yeah, I love the way you put that.
So I wonder then, with all of this talk about the melancholy of, you know, kind of the kids and things, maybe it would be a beautiful time for some blues harmonica.
Yeah, okay, I'll play a little for you. I will say that this is an instrument that is meant to be played with other people, so it's kind of an obnoxious thing to do. But a guy I play with a lot keeps saying, "Don't forget, you have a tiny atomic bomb in your pocket." So it's not this instrument. But I'll play a little bit, I guess, just to give you a sense.
So maybe then we can transition over to Jackalope. So on the trail of the Jackalope. So maybe you could give us kind of the background, kind of the lay of the land, and we could chat about it a bit.
Yeah, sure. So that's my most recent book. It's called On the Trail of the Jackalope. And, you know, most people in the West are familiar with the jackalope, this iconic hoax, right? The rabbit that has the antlers or the horns. And so, you know, I have been seeing jackalopes all over the place in the form of, you know, beers and whiskeys and bumper stickers, and, you know, here's a T-shirt for the book. And, you know, I sort of wondered, like, well, where did this weird thing come from? And I was at my local brew pub and I saw a woman lift a pint of hazy IPA, and on her shoulder she had a jackalope tattoo. And I said, okay, this has gone too far. I got to try to figure this out. And so I went on this quest to understand this iconic Western American myth of the horned rabbit. And it just ended up becoming this incredible journey. So part of the book is about where the actual jackalope hoax comes from. And I traveled and interviewed all these people, and that's a really cool story. Part of it is about the dissemination of that myth. Like, how has this stuck around for almost 100 years when a lot of other equally fantastic stories have vanished? And then there's a lot in the book about the jackalope in the arts, in film, in music, in painting, and visual art. And then the big reveal, the big pivot in the book is the last third of the book, when I reveal that horned rabbits actually exist in nature. And they are rabbits that get these weird growths on their head that are caused by a papillomavirus. And I make the connection between the way these weird rabbits have virus-induced growth, the fact that people in both settler and indigenous cultures around the world have been representing horned rabbits in their art and in their natural history for centuries. You know, I even found like 3 Buddhist sutras where the Buddha uses the horned rabbit as a teaching tool. These are thousands of years old, And I was like, wow, horned rabbits are in cultures from around the world. Where does that come from? And, long story short is these virus-stricken rabbits essentially are horned rabbits. And then I do the nerdy stuff in the back part of the book, where I trace that to show readers how it was the study of actual horned rabbits that led eventually to the development of the HPV, the human papillomavirus vaccine, which is the safest, most effective anti-cancer therapy we've ever created, and it wouldn't exist without horned rabbits. So you can see how this is kind of in my wheelhouse, right? It starts out with all the human stuff, all the American West stuff, but then pivots into the sort of natural history and popular science stuff. And by the end of the book, when I'm making my own jackalope mount, my taxidermy mount for the first time, and I suck at it and it's grossed out by it and everything else, I've had this journey where I've traveled all over the country, interviewing everybody from taxidermists to cryptozoologists to epidemiologists and virologists. And I sort of told this jackalope story in this full arc, from the really silly, wacky stuff all the way to real horned rabbits in nature and how they're saving millions of lives through the HPV vaccine. So it was a book that took me to a lot of places I didn't expect to go. I learned a lot, and it really, it changed my thinking about what kind of stuff I want to do going forward. It was a real eye opener for me.
I wonder, though, in your research, were you able to confirm that the jackalope, in fact, like they caused cancer so that they could get the credit for curing it?
Well, that is something you hear a lot. When I was on a book tour last year, a lot of people would tell me their jackalope stories. And, a lot of people said, you're just making the jackalope out like a savior, like a mythical, magical animal that swoops in and saves lives. But, this is a vicious animal. It has attacked people many, many times. And a lot of people have been killed and maimed by jackalopes. Not to mention the fact that, many of these viral induced cancers, may have been caused by evil jackalopes. There are good jackalopes and bad jackalopes, but
sure.
Some subspecies that are absolutely, demonic. And so the whole cute bunny thing is a misconception. It really depends on the subspecies. But that there is a prevailing theory that jackalopes cause cancer just to cure it so that they could get the credit, and then people wouldn't be as likely to hunt them because they would value the contribution that they had made to medicine. So, I'm glad you've heard that, because it's important that narrative be out there also.
Right. We want to make sure everyone gets the complete story here.
No, it's all about information. We want to provide people with information.
Right. Which is very funny. The next thing I was going to ask is the jackalope very dangerous? What do we do if we encounter one in the wild?
Yeah, well, there's lots of myths about jackalopes, and, some are true and some aren't. A lot of people say that there was a saber-toothed jackalope that weighed about 150 pounds that used to attack wagon trains and homesteads that's now extinct. There's scientific arguments about whether that's true. But then there's stuff that we do know, like, well, how fast can a jackalope run? Obviously 90 miles an hour, because it's a hybrid of a pronghorn and a jackrabbit. A pronghorn can run 60, a jackrabbit can run 30, 60 plus 30. So, that kind of stuff is pretty clear.
That's how the math would work, yeah.
How do you attract jackalopes, Bill? There's only one way: with whiskey. You attract.
Very good.
That's absolutely true. Among the jackalope stories that everybody agrees on, jackalopes can only be attracted with whiskey. Jackalope milk is a powerful aphrodisiac, but it's really dangerous to try to milk a jackalope, even though the does do sleep on their backs, but they're really vicious. And jackalope is the only animal in the natural world that can ventriloquize. It can, essentially throw its voice. So going back to the 19th century, cowboys would tell stories about, you sit around the campfire and sing, and you would hear this voice come in from the sage harmonizing with you. And that's the jackalope, of course, but there's still all this misinformation. Like people say, oh, the jackalope harmonizes with the bass part. And that's not true. It's always the treble part of the song. So there's a lot of horseshit out there. But they can be vicious. And in fact, hunters on the frontier used to wear lengths of stovepipe on their legs so that if the jackalope, attacked their lower legs, that, they had that armor protection. Jackalopes are so rare because they only mate during lightning storms, so when the bolts start crashing, they kind of cavort erotically on their back paws, and that's what they get worked up. So, but like I say, mixed in with science about the jackalope is, all this misinformation. So that's part of what interested me too, is how do you disentangle those things?
Sure, very good. I wonder, was there, and maybe it was within there, I wonder if there was a favorite hoax or myth or something about the jackalope that you came across that, maybe surprised you or caught your attention a little more than the others?
I think my favorite thing is how many people, especially when I did 60 or so readings last year around the West, and people would always come up and tell me their jackalope stories. And in that world of jackalope narratives, my favorite kind of subgenre is the jackalope hunt story. I had so many people come up and say, oh man, I got to tell you about this. When I was 13, my grandfather took me out on the prairie, and he swore that we were going to track jackalopes, and he made me get down on my hands and knees, and he showed me little tracks, and he taught me what to listen for. And everybody's story was different, but everybody had a story about somebody who had messed with them before they knew better. And,
sure.
And the cool thing about it was people never felt exploited or made fun of. They always told those stories with so much warmth and nostalgia. It was like, that was such a cool experience. And then I got to cross over into the community of people who understand the joke. And then I did it for my niece or my nephew or my grandkid. So I love the idea of the jackalope hunt, because this tradition of having ritual hunts for animals that exist only in the imagination actually exist around the world. And they often are rites of passage for young people. Like, we're going to mess with you one last time before we welcome you into the adult community. So I think the hoaxes that were built around hunts, especially within families, that stuff was really gold. I had a blast. When you travel with a book, typically you're telling people your stories. But when I traveled with the Jackalope book, everybody was telling me their stories, and that made it so fun.
Yeah, that does sound fun. You know what it reminded me of? We and any kids out there, I hope you're not watching this show of writers drinking whiskey here, but close your ears. But my son held on to Santa Claus for a while, and I think like all kids, they held on a little longer because they think they won't get presents anymore. Like if they tell you, they don't believe anymore. And so what we started doing with the kids when they're like 12, 13, whatever age, is we would go, okay, Santa Claus isn't real. And then we would start giving them a budget. Okay, so for Christmas, here's your budget. And you don't get them yet. We're going to wrap them. They're going to go under the tree, but you can help, be Santa that night, take the things out. And so we kind of make a new tradition out of it. But when we were telling him last year, it kind of reminded me of that, because then like, all the other kids kind of learned and were like, okay, Dad, I believe. And he had never said that. So we're like, okay, I don't know if he still believes a little or not. So but let's have the conversation. And that was part of it, was that, yes, this is a myth that we're telling you, but there's things you can learn from it. And then now you're part of the club. You get to come in. So it's almost like that jackalope hunt, right? It's like, oh, you have these myths, these things that aren't tangibly real, but there's other things around them. And I think sometimes, like we've talked about it since, but I'm like, sometimes just that magic of being able to believe in something you can't see or doesn't make ready sense, because that will have practical impact in your life later.
Yeah, man, you crushed it. That's exactly what interests me so much about this, is that idea that, we have to be able to have a world that's rich enough that the imagination is part of it and not just what we see in front of us every day. I love the Santa Claus example, by the way, because, no adult would say, oh, you're lying to these kids. These little kids are, you need to get in there right now and tell them the truth about the scientific facts about Santa Claus. Nobody would say that, right? Because we understand we want to let our kids exist in a world of magic and imagination for as long as they can. So part of what's cool to me about the Jackalope is it kind of extends like that Santa vibe into adulthood, because jackalopes occupy that liminal zone between the real and the imaginary. They're a hoax, and yet they exist in our imagination. And part of the reason people love them and that they've been so widely disseminated in the culture is that they keep that part of that childlike part of our imagination alive. And actually, one chapter in the book is called The Necessary Monster, and it's a term I borrow from Argentinian writer Jorge Luis Borges, whom I love. And Borges said, hey, it's not an accident that every culture in the world has monsters. Every indigenous or settler culture, it has their Bigfoot or their Loch Ness monster or their whatever. It has something that's just beyond the edge of the known. And he said, because as a species, we're evolved to need that feeling of uncertainty, of wildness, of excitement, of magic that exists beyond the known world. And if we roll up out of bed every morning and say, the world is nothing more than what we see before our eyes, then something that kids have naturally has been lost to us. So, to me, this book is less about horned rabbits and more about human imagination and the need for the human imagination to create a world that is wild enough that things we aren't sure of might actually exist, right? And
Sure.
Just one quick story. I went to Douglas, Wyoming, this little town out on the prairie where the first jackalope taxidermy mount was made back in the 1930s. And I interviewed all these people, including the mayor of the town. And when I was interviewing the mayor, his wife told me this story about how she had grown up in this little town in Wyoming and how they had this tradition. They would put out oats for the jackalope in the same way you'd put out cookies for Santa Claus. And she said,
Sure.
I remember. And by the way, as she's telling me this story, she's knitting jackalope booties for her newly born granddaughter. She says, Mike, I remember the day that a friend of mine at school told me the jackalope wasn't real. And I said, I don't believe you. And I rushed home and asked my grandmother, and my grandmother, had to tell me that the jackalope was a myth. And she said, I cried. That was one of the hardest days of my life. That was a great moment for me as a humorist, because I had come into this project like, okay, Jackalope's going to be low-hanging fruit for a humor writer. Let's go. And then I realized that people have these relationships to this thing that are really rich and really different, and that I have to bring that humility as a writer and open my heart and open my ears. And what does this really mean to different people? So throughout the book, no matter who I interview, whether it's a Pulitzer Prize winning writer or a Nobel Prize winning scientist, or it's like a hunter or an oil patch roughneck at a bar in rural Wyoming, the last question I ask everybody in my interviews or conversations in bars sometimes is, why do you think people love jackalopes? So over the course of the book, you get this accretion, this layering of answers to that question. And what's really cool is everybody loves jackalopes, but for very different reasons. So yeah, you've hit it, man, in talking about the way the imagination is real to kids and the way we have to find a way as grown-ups to at least have an analog of that in our lives, so we don't just become people who can't see beyond what's in front of our eyes.
Right. Well, and I think because when you do, you just kind of become a cog, right? Like if you can't see the possibility, you stop seeing possibilities because you think, your island gets smaller, right? You used that metaphor earlier. That island actually gets smaller because you start going, well, we know so much, and the ignorance is spreading out, further and further. So I love listening to like stories. Like my wife and I will do this anytime we go on a long drive. We actually did, our anniversary was, I guess about a month ago now. And we went up to Central Coast, California, the Cambria area, if you're familiar. And that's where she actually proposed to me because she's insane.
Maybe you just were taking too long.
I know, maybe. Well, actually, the true story behind it is she was afraid of how I would do it because I was making jokes that I was going to but because she loved chicken wings and hot dogs back in the day. And I was like, I'm going to put it on the chicken wing, and she's like, oh, so she was like, oh, I was afraid of how you were going to do it. And let me just say, though, because I was joking, I was never going to do any of those things. She took a ring and put it into some salsa that our friend's wife used to make us, like a pico de gallo style salsa. And Priya's her name. So the last day we're in Cambria, we're eating the salsa. We're gonna get ready to leave soon. And there's a ring in there. And I'm eating around it. And she's like, do you notice there's a ring there? I'm like, oh yeah, I think Priya must have dropped her ring in it. But I know who made it. So it's not like the cook. It's something I'm like, oh, Priya made a salsa. She must have dropped her ring. I'm gonna make sure I bring it back to her. And she's like, that's the man's ring. I'm like, oh, maybe it's Naveen's, it's her husband, my buddy. And she's just like, so what's your answer? I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm just going to give it back to And finally, as she looked at me expectantly, I'm like, oh, this is something different. So she was afraid of me proposing with hot dogs or buffalo wings, complete with Bowdy guy humor along with what I would say with those things. And instead she ends up doing it with the salsa. So aside here, we were driving up to Cambria, which is a good 3.5 hour drive, 4 hour drive. Scenic and super beautiful, obviously, but we were listening to the Unsolved Mysteries podcast the whole way. And I've loved it since I was a kid, and they had a podcast. I think the podcast is dark now, but so it had like ghosts and things and the missing persons, etc. But I always love listening to those stories. And I'm like, I don't know if Bigfoot exists or not. I don't know if ghosts, whatever it is. But people they've experienced something. And some people are hoaxing and they're pulling your chain. There's a lot of people, though. I don't think all of them are hoaxing. So something happened and that's meaningful. And why is it bad to listen, just to hear them out? I don't need to have the answer. I don't care if Bigfoot's an ape, he's an alien, he's the Gigantopithecus, whatever they're saying. It's interesting to hear people's reaction to it and then tell the story. And if they're hoaxers and they tell a great story, well, I'm a fiction writer. I'm kind of hoaxing you. And so,
yeah. I mean, a couple of quick thoughts on that. One that really sticks with me is a friend of mine, Robert Michael Pyle, a great ecologist and nature writer, and he wrote a book called Where Bigfoot Walks. And, Bigfoot, you picture like, middle-aged white dudes on the weekend out there with headlamps. Like the whole thing is absurd, right? But, Bob, he makes this argument that what we need to have is wild places that are so wild that our imagination can tell us it's possible. And right. I really love that idea, right? Like, well, let's forget about whether there's a, relic hominid in Washington State or whatever, and instead say, let's preserve forests wild enough that we could still wonder. And that's how I feel about the jackalope, right? Is like, when I look out over the Great Basin, it's so wild and outrageous. I think anything seems possible. And I love that anything seems possible feeling. So I think that's cool. I think you're right. We got to keep our minds open to that stuff. And also, by the way, there have been lots of animals that existed only in mythology, usually in indigenous folklore. And then white scientists would say, oh, that's all this native horseshit. Yeah. And then later, these animals would be discovered and described by science. There's even a term for them, which is ethnoknowns. In other words, they're known ethnographically, but not scientifically. And one example is, this incredible freshwater stingray that has a 10-foot disc. And native people had stories about this for, decades. And white scientists were like, look, if there was a stingray with a 10-foot disc living in this river, I think we would know it. Turned out to be real. So, that kind of stuff has happened. Or the coelacanth, the lobe-finned fish that was supposed to be extinct for 66 million years, and then somebody caught one. Like, I just love that idea that, why are we so sure of ourselves? Why can't we, we don't have to always take a position on things being one way or the other. And that's what I love about the jackalope. It just refuses to be one thing or another. Anything that's hybrid, and mythology is full of hybrid creatures, they're always testing those boundaries, trying to keep the boundary between the real and the imaginative permeable, like it is in a kid's universe. So, I don't know, man. I think this stuff is fascinating.
No, I'm completely there with you. I did wonder, so you had mentioned, and if I state this incorrectly, correct me. So you had mentioned that there was the doctor that was studying the real life rabbits that get the horns because of a virus. and that what ended up being the HPV vaccine and et cetera. Were they studying them? Was it just contemporaneously, like that they happened to be studying while Jackalope, mythology and kind of hysteria was going? Well, not hysteria is probably too strong for what was going on, but you get my drift. Was it just kind of happening in two camps, or were those doctors, were they inspired at all by listening to the stories of the Jackalope?
That's just such a great question, and I spent a long time trying to answer it. The virologist Richard Shope, who was the first person to work on horned rabbits in the 1930s, I've interviewed his surviving children. I've read all his scientific articles. I've read his personal correspondence. There's no indication that he was ever aware of the jackalope as a mythological phenomenon. He only knew about the horned rabbits. The Herrick brothers, who were the two, Ralph and Doug Herrick, were these two teenagers in rural Wyoming who made the first jackalope hoax mount. They swore, both of them, till the day they died, that their hoax mount had not been inspired by real horned rabbits. So you have both of these people essentially saying, we didn't know, right. But I don't know. I mean, I still to this day don't know. And the other thing that's very cool about this, Bill, is that the Herrick brothers swore that they made their first jackalope hoax mount, that is taxidermy mount, where they took a rabbit and put deer antlers on it. And by the way, this was in the Great Depression. They were teenagers. They came up with this idea because they were taking a correspondence course in taxidermy. They sold that first hoax mount for $10 to the guy who owned the only hotel in the little town of Douglas. He put it up over the bar. Every jackalope bumper sticker, T-shirt, shot glass, you have ever seen in your life came from that first jackalope that those two teenagers made in the 1930s. But the cool thing is, they swore that they did it in 1932. And I know from the scientific record that Richard Shope, who was at the Rockefeller Institute in Princeton, started studying horned rabbits in 1932. So you've asked the perfect question. There's not a real answer, but there is this beautiful cosmic serendipity to the idea that the hoax horned rabbit that became the jackalope that's iconic in popular culture and the real virus-stricken horned rabbit that led to the HPV vaccine were essentially both. Their genesis is in 1932 in different places, with different people. But I love to think about that relationship. So that's a great question, but we don't know the answer.
Right. Well, that's awesome. It strikes me that there's always these weird things, right? Like you think about something, and like the common one people get, right? Like you think about someone and they call you, right? Like, or nowadays they probably text you, right? Or whatever it might be. But there's these weird connections you find all the time. If you just go, well, why did that happen at the same time? If they didn't know, and maybe they didn't, maybe they did, but maybe they didn't. Why does that happen so serendipitously like that? What's the there's the old concept of that universal unconsciousness, this floating or consciousness like floating around out there, and who knows? But it's fascinating.
And that's coming back to humility too, right? How can we be so sure? And my friend Rick Bass, the Montana writer, puts this in a very cool way. And he essentially says, the universe is full of magic. We've just learned to call it coincidence. And I really like that, right? Like, okay, we can find a way to explain it away, but there are things that happen that just don't want to make themselves subject to our normal explanations. And it's again, it's less that I'm interested in arguing about, what exists and what doesn't. It's just that I would like to argue for the idea that things we can imagine are real in a way. And if we don't use our imaginations, our capacity to expand what's real to us is atrophied. And so, I'm not out there hunting Bigfoot, but I think it's just good for us to live in a world where adults who indulge in the imagination, which is another way of saying writers, artists, musicians, right? There's a place for that, because
Yeah.
It expands our sense of the possible, and everybody needs that to get through their day.
Right. Right. Well, and because truly, we have no idea what's possible.
Right.
we like to think we do as a society, scientific community, this community, that community. We really have no idea. Like, you can't go past the speed of light, and then they go, well, you worked space and you did this. We don't know, so we there's no reason to have. It's okay to have borders conceptually, but you also need to have the conceptual ability to erase those borders and look at life without that.
Yeah.
So I think that's beautiful.
Erasing the borders, that's a great way to put it. I love that. And I've done a lot of work on early natural history, and you go back and everybody's like, oh, well, swallows disappear during part of the year. Obviously, they fly to the moon. Or, no, they don't fly to the moon. They hibernate at the bottom of the ocean. And we look at that stuff now. Thomas Jefferson said he thought mammoths still existed in the interior of the United States. You look at this stuff and you go, what was the matter with these dumbasses? They didn't know anything, as if people aren't going to look back at us in 50 or 100 years. These people are so unbelievably ignorant, Like, there were people denying climate change in 2023. How is that possible? So, I think, again, that's where humility comes back in, is to think that, when we judge the past for its ignorance, to pause for a moment and imagine how we ourselves might be judged, and to think about how little we know. I don't know. I just find, maybe there's some perversity to this, but I just find it exciting to think about how little we know. And I find, deadening to think of how much we think we know. I don't know. Are we going to have a second drink? What's the pacing here?
Absolutely. Let's do a second drink, and then we can, go into some writer talk. But by the name of the show, I'm legally mandated to have some writing talk. So I'm going to go with a favorite panel question of anyone that's ever done some, writing interview in all of history. What is your writing process like?
Oh, God. I know. This question, no shade on you, Bill. This question is so tiring that I actually made a video parodying it. So if anybody wants to Google.
I watched that video. I'll link it up. I watched the video before this. Partially why I wanted to ask you the question.
Okay.
But,
On the trail of the Jackalope official book trailer, you will see me in a satirical send-up of an interview about my writing process. But it's an important question. It's an important question, and it's really, really important for young writers. And I think that so many people, when they're starting out as writers, they ask more experienced writers, like, what should my writing process be? And that's the wrong question. It really is that individual writers have to figure out what works for them. So, like, when I'm mentoring writers, I'll ask questions like, when you write, do you like to have your desk messy or clean? Do you write inside or out? Do you need to be alone, or do you like to write around other people, like at a coffee shop? Do you have music or not? If you have music, does it have words or not? Like, I ask a million questions to help people realize, oh yeah, I'm already making a bunch of decisions about what works for me. How can I craft that into something that makes me self-aware about my process? So I'm going to, for your entertainment pleasure, Bill, I'm going to tell you 3 mini narratives about writers who have unusual writing processes. And I hope that if there's anybody out there who's watching this because they're trying to pick up tips, we'll take this to heart. Okay, so I'm going to give you these 3 scenarios. Okay, scenario number 1. These are true stories, by the way. I can't give you the names of these people. Scenario number 1, this guy is a really well-known American novelist. A lot of his novels have been made into Hollywood feature films. I'm hanging out with this guy on a hike, and I ask him this question about his writing process. Because I was young, I was trying to learn. And he said, well, it's simple, really. It's pretty standard. I get up in the morning, I get a cup of coffee, I go into my writing den, I sit down in my chair, I put on my seatbelt, and I kind of paused and I said, you do what? And he said, yeah, I put on my seatbelt, and then I get my stabbing stick. I said, you're what? And he said, yeah, I put on my seatbelt and get my stabbing stick. Like, he's acting like, what's wrong with you? And I said, well, what's your stabbing stick? He says, well, across from my desk, my whole wall is a corkboard. And that's where I keep all my notes, for my book projects. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, you got your notes on the corkboard. I get that. But what's the stabbing stick? He's like, well, I got to have a stabbing stick because of my seatbelt. I'm like, what the hell is this guy talking about? And he said, if I take off my seatbelt, I'll get out of my chair and then I won't write. So I got to have a seatbelt. But how am I going to reach my notes if I don't have a stabbing stick? So the point is, like, this guy's cranking out killer novels with this weird ass approach. But in conversation with me, it was like, what aren't you getting about this? This is so obvious. Okay, Second story. I have another friend, also a novelist. Okay, and she is the kind of person who, as she writes, she has a tendency to self-correct. She finds herself editing herself by the sentence, and it breaks her flow and her momentum as a writer. So what she does is she composes on a manual typewriter, old school, bangity bang bang, not even electronic, because she doesn't want to be able to go back and erase anything. With a manual typewriter, she has no choice. Once she's written something, it can't be erased, it can't be edited. So she composes on a manual typewriter, which is about as primitive as you can imagine. And then she has like a state-of-the-art scanner that she takes these typewritten pages and puts into to create a document that can then later be edited. But by the time she does that, it's a different stage and it doesn't interfere with her composition process. Okay.
Sure.
Third story. There's a guy who is a nature writer, and his stuff is all environmental, and it's all about the West, and it's all about the desert and the Sierra foothills. And when he gets stuck on his writing, he packs up all his notes and all his books into a giant suitcase, and he packs up a bunch of beer and whiskey into a giant cooler, and then he takes the whiskey and beer and the suitcase full of notes, and he goes and checks into a casino hotel on the highest floor he can get on. So he's looking out at the mountains, but he's in the casino. And then he just essentially stays up for 3 or 4 days straight and does his nature writing while he drinks in a casino hotel bedroom. Okay, so now here's the point for you novice writers out there. Like, all three of those sound like terrible, crazy ideas. And secondly, they're all three so different from each other. But the take home is, these are people who have figured out how to handle their writing process for themselves. So if you write best, in a headstand, then write in a headstand and don't let anybody tell you how to do it. So I hope the anecdotes were entertaining, but I really have taken that to heart because, like, I talk to my literary heroes, like, how do you do it? And one person's like, oh, I write everything down in a journal. Somebody else says, I've never kept a journal in my life. I speak into my phone while I'm driving my car. I talk to my wife. I talk to a neighborhood writing group. I mean, everybody has a different approach. You've got to figure out what works for you. And the only way that can happen is if you experiment. So, be willing to be weird until you figure it out. That's my advice.
Right. That's lovely.
We should end there because that's really all I have. Be willing to be weird and it'll all work out.
Well, I think I love the anecdotes, by the way, because they also all make sense. Like, we actually think of it like, oh no, he can't get up. He has a seatbelt on. Like, and actors are famous for being weird. Right? Oh, this actor goes in. I think it's Joaquin Phoenix is the latest like weird actor they've been talking about that goes in and he's just in character for 3 weeks at a time.
Yeah.
But writers, we tend to not want to be weird, and we'll shy away from that weirdness. But sometimes you need a little weird. I've changed my writing process based on the book I'm writing, like the work I'm working on, because I'm like, this needs something a little different. I need to kind of shift. So I think, experimenting and just doing what works for you, and acknowledging this doesn't work for me. I'm not going to do that. I always hear people, and I forget, I was at a conference once and on a panel, they're like, oh, Do you write every morning and write 1,500 words or whatever it is, you know? And I think it was based off of, I think it was the Stephen King's writing book. And I'm like, look, I've got 4 kids. I've worked steady jobs. I got a wife. I have other things going on. We have dogs up the wazoo here. The idea that I can wake up every day and then write 1,500 words, that sounds lovely, but I would never, ever write anything if that's what I was hoping for to happen every day. So I've had to, what I used to do, and I didn't learn this from Einstein. I realized he did it later. I heard the anecdote later, is that he got really good when I think he was at the Postal Service or something. He's got good at his job, and then he spent all of his free time just working on his, theories and stuff. And so that's actually what I did for a long time. So I got really good at whatever I needed to do, to where I could do that within a couple hours. I had 6 hours then to kind of fill, where everyone else would fill that chatting and stuff. I would chat with people. I have friends at work, but I wouldn't go that far. I just looked like I was working really hard for 8 hours. But 6 of those hours were for me, because I got so good at what I was doing that I could, I can make the man happy to have too.
But you've hit on something super important, Bill, which is not only that developing your own sense of your writing process is very idiosyncratic and specific to you, but also when you internalize that kind of advice, I just think what you just said was so important, because when you internalize somebody else's advice, like write for 2 hours every morning or whatever, well, some of us don't have lives that are built for that, or we don't have sensibilities that are built for that. And then we end up feeling like, oh, we're not going to be able to do this because I'll never be a writer because I didn't write 1,500 words this morning because of my kids or whatever. And it's like, I just think that's so dangerous, because it puts people in a position where it looks like you're trying to help them, but you're actually giving them a prescription. And if they can't fill that prescription, they feel like they've failed. And so, that's why the stories that I offer are so outrageous, because my point is, if you say, I hang out with my kids and then I go to sleep and I sleep for 3 hours and then I wake up in the middle of the night and I write for 90 minutes and then I go back to sleep and I wake up and go to work, whatever, man, figure out what will work for you. And I've found that my writing process has changed over time too, as I've learned more about myself, as the project changes, and also, just as the demands of my family life change, as my physiology changes, right? We make adjustments. But I really, I don't mean to be like evangelical about this, but part of what frustrates me about the writing process question is that when writers answer that, they appear to be offering a prescription. Do what I do and it'll work. And that's horseshit, so that's why I now answer it with this set of anecdotes to show, like, no, don't do what I do. Figure out what's going to work for you, and then follow that path until you have confidence in your process. So yeah, it's a trial and error method, but it's a lot more intellectually honest than just taking somebody else's prescription.
Sure, absolutely. Well, and the truth of the matter is, like, my writing process, it's a lot like foreplay interrupted by a jackhammer. So it's like you're starting to get in the mood, you're titillated, you're feeling good, and then all hell breaks loose. There's hammering, destruction, and before you know it, there's just debris, the landscape's altered, and you're like, what the fuck just happened here, right? You have no idea. And then, like, kind of a mixture of, like, raw humiliation, unrequited desire. I kind of start sifting through and, apologizing the whole time. I try to sift through and just sculpt it into something that, if not pleasurable, is kind of meaningful for the both of us. That's my writing process. And I've been kicked off of so many panels.
That's the greatest gloss I've ever heard on the writing process. We'll now add your anecdote to this list.
So we got to Jackalope. Where am I at here? Oh, here we go. I'm back on track.
Right. I knew you could do it.
Thank you for that. As I joked, there's that moment. What's fun for me, actually, when I'm editing the show, is I had on Ray McManus, who's a poet from South Carolina, that Daniel Cross Turner that put me in John Lane, the whole 6 degrees of separation here. And I was editing his show yesterday, working through. I'm not quite done, but there's a moment where you can see the liquor hit both of us. And then from there, I'm like, this is internet gold. Like, this is so good from this moment on, this is perfect. So I'm feeling that right now. I'm like, oh, the liquor is hit. Like, this is
the brilliance of the concept, man. Is like, for people like, I do a lot of interviews. You just have this, you kind of fall into a certain kind of rhythm and you say the same kind of stuff. And now I'm sort of like, sure, man, ask me anything. I'm ready. This is great.
Right.
The writing process, it's all horse shit. Don't have a process. It's ridiculous. Don't listen to anybody.
I do wonder, generally, so the other question that gets bandied about all the time is, what was your inspiration for this? What was your inspiration for that? And sometimes that might be interesting. There might be a situation with the inspiration's interesting, but I wonder a little bit more when I talk with people, where's the molten core? Like, what makes you a writer? Like, where is that? I must now turn, stories into words that I'm sharing with everyone. What's kind of that, what causes those eruptions of writing these 10 plus books and all of these essays?
Yeah, no, it's a meaningful question. I mean, I just think that so much of our way of understanding the world is conditioned by data. Like, we have information all the time, but that information has to be translated into story. So especially like when I'm doing science writing, we got all these awesome environmental scientists out there who are discovering all these incredible things. But then on the other end, on the receiving end, most of us are just regular like schmoes trying to get through our day, and how we think about the world and what decisions we make aren't necessarily impacted by, what somebody writes in some science article. So we need filmmakers and musicians and artists and writers to bridge that gap and help to translate or interpret that stuff so that it can be presented in a way that is meaningful to people. I mean, narrative is our oldest technology as a species. Think about human beings as animals. We suck at almost everything, right? We're not fast. We can't fly. We don't swim very well. We can't hide. We don't have sharp claws. We're relatively weak. We're not very good at very many things. But the two things we're awesome at are bipedalism and narrative, right? Walking upright and telling stories. Those are the things that really make us special as a species. So we're hardwired for narrative. So as a writer, part of what inspires me is, how can I take all this geekery that I myself am really interested in, this environmental geekery, and translate that stuff into stories that might actually change somebody's way of thinking, or maybe even, a lucky break, change the choices they make about how they live their life. And I don't mean that my work is, pedantic and polemical, but I still hope I'm having an impact on people, right? So I don't know, I think it's good in a way. I joked before, like, nobody can sell a book in America. I think it's kind of good in a way that writers can't make any money, generally speaking, because it just puts us in a position where we're automatically motivated by other things. So then you have to really reflect, like, well, this isn't anybody's day job, with very few exceptions. So why am I really doing this? Do I need people to hear what I have to say about myself? Do I want to educate people? Do I want to change things? But, you don't do it because it's lucrative. And so you have to focus on more important things. And I like that, actually, the way that stringency demands more of us as artists. What inspires me? The belief that storytelling changes how we think of each other in the world. The belief that we have to work together toward a more mature understanding of the relationship between our species and the natural world. And then finally, and this is the one that like gets me in trouble the most, the belief that we have got to laugh. I mean, humor is a survival strategy. And
Right.
all the time you hear, like, if you really cared about, I don't care what it is, if you really cared about this, that, or the other thing, you'd never joke about it. I think that's horseshit, you know?
Right.
There's no culture, contemporary or ancient, settler or indigenous, that we know of in the world that has ever not had humor. We eat differently, we marry differently, we bury our dead differently, we do everything differently. We all have humor. And it's because I believe as a species, we're evolved to need that to survive. And so I feel like as a writer, part of what motivates me is if I can make people laugh, if I can lighten their burden even for a minute or two, you know, life is hard, you know, it's hard on a lot of people. And I just think the idea that the real work, the serious work, and humor work are opposite of each other, it's a very recent idea and it's a dumb idea. You know, if you asked Milton or Shakespeare or Cervantes or take your pick, they would say, of course, you know, humor is a way to do real work, to do important work. The idea that humor work and serious work are the opposite of each other is about 150 years old. The Victorians invented it right along with sexual repression. You can't trust these people. So, you know, so that's part of what motivates me as a writer is like, life is hard. And if I can find a way to communicate something meaningful and still lift people up a little bit, instead of just saying, here's what you're doing wrong, or the world is burning down, you know, writing as an act of radical empathy that somehow, even if we're laughing together, we're laughing about a form of suffering that we both understand. That human connection is what keeps me doing this.
There's a lot I love about that, but one of the things that I really love about that is you'll hear stories of soldiers in foxholes, right, making jokes. You'll hear people like, you know, civilians and caught in the middle of a war still finding, and it is, there's not that much exceptional about us. Like you mentioned, like we're not that fast. We're not physically, there's nothing really, well, besides walking up, right? There's nothing too big going on here. And we used to go, oh, our brains are so big. And then you find out all these other species have bigger brains. Well, then our brains to body weight. Well, then dolphins brain to body weight. So it's like, I don't know that we're actually that much smarter. It's this confluence of things. And maybe part of that confluence of things is, you know, bipedalism and then having, you know, or opposable thumbs, which helps, you know, build things. But maybe it's humor. Maybe it's narrative structure. Maybe these things that like we put down are actually the things that cause us to strive and to be. So what I always fear, because like I think it's silly to deny climate change because it's the history of the earth. Like the climate's changed on us. Like people, you can debate if it's cars, it's this or that. The climate changes, it's clearly changing. Let's just agree that it's changing, right? But what do you do, you know, with that? Like, what do you do with the, like, we just argue over it, or, you know, we have this generation of people that feel crumbled and depressed by it to where they can't do anything and the world's just going to end tomorrow. And it's like, but you know, with a little bit of humor, a little bit of light on that, you might actually do more about it than just feeling, you know, throwing oil on paintings or whatever it might be. Like you might do real things, you know, about it. We might make real changes, right? If there's this much we can actually control about the environment, which is probably very true, right? Like I always think of it, they'll go, oh, climate change is just the sun. Okay, that's fine. If we can only control 0.5% of it, doesn't that make that 0.5% even more important? You know? Yeah. And instead of feeling depressed and hating humans, which seems like a very modern thing too, you know, it's like, oh, humans are so bad, you know. We watched the show, not to go completely on a rant here, but we watched the show at the Sphere in Vegas while we were there. And U2 was there, I think the week before. I think they're coming back, but they had, it's called Postcards from Earth. And it was pretty cool being in there. It almost feels like a magic motion ride, which tends to make me sick, but it's so big and sprawling that you don't get that real motion sickness of it. And so it is pretty awe-inspiring. It feels like when you're soaring over Africa that you're really there, and that's neat, technological achievement and wonderful. But the story was almost nonsensical with it. And it was very human hating. Because it's like, oh, and we poisoned the earth. And so the humans in the story leave, they blast off, and this rocket ships everywhere, which they must have ored and just mined the earth to make these rocket ships, but they didn't bother talking about that part. They blast off in rocket ships, and then they just go to new planets. And they have this magical seed basically that terraforms the planet in like 5 minutes, And it was like, but it was like all the humans left and we only would visit Earth because we were so bad to it. And it's like, that really the message you want to descend? Like, if you really want people to care about the climate and the environment, do you really want to just send the message that you're awful and you can only solve this by blasting off to another planet that you can magically terraform into a new Earth in like 5 seconds anyways? So, but the narrative of it, the story, it can be very powerful, but you see them falling on deaf ears all the time when we get into this, the sadness of it, right? I think there's a melancholy, and it's like, no, we gotta laugh. It's always okay. Like, laugh. People laugh. There's a death in the family. Whatever happens, you'll see people laugh, and that's not because they don't care that the person died. It's because that's a natural part of this experience. It's an extremely, extremely important part. So
it's a survival mechanism. I mean, whether we're talking about the earth or somebody in our family, it's a survival mechanism. And I don't know, I feel like in the environmental writing community in particular, there's so much anger and so much grief. And those are really legitimate emotions, and we need our writing to be able to express those emotions and share them with readers. But I ask people, like, well, just think to your own life. How long do you want to be angry? How long do you want to be sad? And most people would say, I get mad, I get depressed, but I really don't want it to last. I want to still deal with problems, but I don't want to be in that particular paralysis, that hole, And so, I mean, and weirdly, increasingly, I mean, we're writers, right? But increasingly, there's even a bunch of social science research that's showing that it's more effective to communicate with people about climate change through a stand-up routine than it is through a lecture.
Sure.
Dude, what do you think is funny about climate change, right? And so I think for those of us who are humorists, we're always on the defensive because the attack is always, if you really cared, if you really took this seriously, how could you joke about that? This isn't funny. It happened to my uncle, whatever. It's like, I reject that. I think that humor is a survival mechanism. And when we laugh together, it's a way of saying to each other, we're going to get through this together. Mm-hmm. And we can still absorb content through humor. I mean, a good intellectually challenging stand-up routine, to use that example, should make us question our beliefs. It should make us think about other people's perspectives. It should make us a little uncomfortable. But we're laughing as we listen to stuff that we would never listen to in the form of somebody just scolding us. And so, I think you're right on, Bill, in everything that you've said about that, just because we laugh together, the funeral example I love, doesn't mean that that's a sign of disrespect. It's a sign of bonding and survival. And especially as an environmental writer, increasingly, I'm like, how can we keep talking about all this hard stuff that depresses everybody and do it in a way that we can survive, and make things better, not worse, lift people up, not push them down.
Sure. Well, and I always think of it, and I've told people this, and we've had some deaths in the family and things recently, but I'm like, there's no reason to ever give up hope. Either it just ends, right? Like, I hope this person kind of makes it through, or they don't, but there's no reason to give it up early. Don't give the ghost up early. Like, you can hope. That's okay. That's important. But keep keep that up. And then, okay, we're all going to die. Hope is going to end, with that death. Let it end with that death. Don't let it end early, because then you're living kind of a half life, from there.
Imagination, right? We got to be able to project some understanding beyond the limits of our everyday life. So I don't know.
Sure.
For me, humor helps to cross those boundaries.
Yeah. No, and I think that's lovely. I think that all the time. And I'll ask you the same question here. But one of the questions I've taken to asking people on the show was, what's the piece of writing advice you wish someone had given you? Right? Because I started with what's a piece of writing advice, and it's read, right? Kind of general things that are not bad, but and important in their way. But what's the piece you wish you had? And the piece I had, you actually said it already, which was, don't worry so much about the money. Worry about, touching hearts. Worry about what's actually matters to you. Because there's kind of a weird dichotomy to the world. There's if your life exists just to resource hog, that's a very vapid, very sad place to be. Like, all I want is money. I just want this. I just want to take things. If your life exists to touch people's hearts, to affect hearts, then that'll be meaningful. And so I think there's that constant war that's been going on between people that, artists, and regular people that are, I just want to touch hearts. I want to do this, versus people that want to resource grab. If you're a resource grab person and you're trying to write, well, good luck to you, because that is a tiny fraction that's making that, wild money. If you want to be a writer, you really need to be in that other camp. And then maybe you get lucky and you make some money or whatever. And maybe you make big money. A bunch of things get turned into movies and, yada, yada, yada. But it's not that rewarding. Like, the reward is, hey, someone like and I love book reviews. One of them I showed to my son because one of his friends mentioned he didn't like his art. My son is 12, and he loves drawing. He's always been really dedicated to it. And one of his friends didn't say anything bad about it, just rated him the lowest of the group. And so he was kind of depressed. So I'm like, let's go look. And I went to Amazon, whatever, pulled up like the 1-star reviews. And I forget. It was like, the story didn't have proper structure. Like, it was like, this guy's an idiot, horrible. And he was laughing, and there's, I've been lucky enough to win some awards and I mostly have nice reviews, but there's the few really bad ones. I just showed him. And so he's laughing. He felt better about it. But I'm like, I laugh and I feel better about it too. That's fine. People can have that. One of the more touching ones, though, was someone that said, I don't know that the characters in this book would read this book. And I don't want to sound like a masochist, but I know I will read this book again, because it made me think so much about my own life and about my decisions. So I watched all these horrible people making bad decisions, read about all these horrible people making bad decisions. It made me think about that, and it touched me. And the way I phrased it, I was like, oh, that's someone I actually connected with in this weird virtual way. And that's why you do it. I don't, the other way you do it, man, you're probably going to be living a sad existence trying to wake up and do the 4 a.m. authors club or whatever it is you're doing. If you're just trying to make money off of it, if that's the whole goal is resource grabbing, you're probably not having the best day all the time. You're probably not going to stick with it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. When I teach creative nonfiction writing workshops, the first thing I do is I tell everybody to take out their phones and look at the New York Times bestseller list for nonfiction. And it's going to be half books that are ghost written that are about rock stars or sports stars or actors and actresses. Right. It's going to be 25% books, people who worked in the White House who have like tell-alls that are political. And it's going to be 25% how-to books, improve your sex life, how to sleep, how to exercise, whatever. It's like, well, that's what drives the machine in New York. And, it's just very, very difficult for people who want to write about other things. The way the structure of agents is worked, the way the structure of New York publishing works. There are niches that are really overdeveloped for certain kinds of stuff. And then there are a lot of people who write in areas that, are difficult to break through. But the main thing is you just cannot continue as a writer if you're operating on incentives and motivations that are provided not only by people outside your control, but largely by people in New York. It just drives me nuts as a Western writer, especially. I call it the view from the Hudson. Like, the publishing industry is centered in New York. And for these people, the West is New Jersey. They don't get anything about us or our paper or what we do. So anyway, I really like the way you put that writing is not a resource grab. If that's what you're interested in, you've chosen the wrong field. I mean, there's a few people, as in music or sports, who are going to make it, but saying that you're in writing for the money is like saying I'm going to go to college so I can play in the NBA. Like, yeah, okay, a couple people will, and everybody else won't. And what did you do with college in the meantime? So yeah, I think the difficulty of the commercial aspect of our business actually, even though it's very disheartening, it has the advantage of driving us back over and over again to like, well, why am I doing this? And if you can't answer that question for yourself, then you got to find something else to do. Like, my reasons for doing this go way beyond what my New York agent thinks about what I'm doing. And it's important to keep reevaluating your priorities as a writer. So, and yeah, your stories about, getting crushed in reviews. Yeah, you're not a writer till you've been, totally slapped to the ground by agents or editors or reviewers. That's just, that's part of the biz.
Sure. I used to, I've gotten rid of it now, but back in the day, and the younger viewers may not even know this, but used to send physical manuscripts, right? I sent a physical story to this, literature pub in that one, and you'd get them back because you sent a self-addressed stamped envelope with it. And I had the stack, that I kept for a while. That was just the motivated. Okay. And it's like some of those same stories got published elsewhere, but you get that stack of rejection. And you can look at that and like contextualize, have some humility, have some drive from, I'm also going to take this the opposite, that, okay, now I'm going to work harder. I'm going to prove to all these people they rejected me that they made a mistake. I think sometimes a little harder virtually, it's a little sadder to get the virtual one because you don't get that physical, tangible aspect of it gave me something to stack up. I used to show my older kids, my Randon and Cassie, my daughters, I would show them that, and they would worry like how many times I failed. Every one of those I tried to get into a magazine, they rejected me. So you can look at it however you want. I try to have a healthy relationship with failure, and I just look at it like, okay, that's a failure. I tried to do that, I failed. That's okay. There it is.
I don't think there's anybody who can make it as a writer, and by make it, I don't mean succeed financially. I mean continue doing the work, which to me is success. I can't imagine anybody who can make it as a writer who can't be slapped to the ground 1,000 times and say, I'm going to get back up and write because it's what I do. It's just, but I think sharing that with your kids, Bill, is so cool because so many younger people have this idea, like, here's the idea of success. If you don't make it right away, you're a failure. And, you get in your case, you get a piece of short fiction rejected 10 times and then it lands. That's not failure. If you get it rejected 30 times, 50 times, and then it lands, that's not failure. That's success. That's how this works. But it's a weird business that we're in because writing is so personal, so intimate. And then to succeed with it, and again, by succeed, I mean continue doing it. To succeed with it, you have to have such thick skin when most of us went into this because we have such thin skin, right? So it's
Sure.
really a difficult thing to hold that two lines of like, I'm going to keep all of my intimacy and vulnerability present in my work because that's what makes it shine.
Right.
But then when it gets slapped to the ground, I'm going to go, well, whatever. I'm going to keep working on it and send it to somebody else. You don't get it, like it's that balance of humility, and you use the word drive, William. I think drive is a great way to put it, that, we have to be humble and recursive and self-focused, but we also just have to say, like, I ain't giving up on this piece. I'm not giving up on this thing. And there's nothing more satisfying. Everybody always thinks like, oh, you send something to the New Yorker and they take it, it's the best day of your life. The best day of your life is when you sent something to 30 people who told you were a dumbass and rejected it, and then you placed it and you were like, no, it was always good enough. And I didn't have the right person, or I needed to make some adjustments to it. But without sounding too old school about it, that idea of enduring some blows on your way to getting where you want to be, and no writer ever arrives, right? It doesn't matter how old you are in chronological years or in experience. You never arrive. You still take it hard when you're rejected. You still have to reconceive things and find ways to move forward. And it still feels great when, as you say, Bill, it's like, oh, see, it landed after all.
Sure. Well, and I think you mentioned it there, that I think it's a beautiful way to look at it is you are not a failure. You just failed, right? So I tried to do something. I failed at that thing I tried to do. That doesn't make me a failure. But what makes me a failure is not trying anything.
Right.
Right. So
I think you could push. I totally agree with that, Bill. And I think you can push it even further, and I know this is going to sound like egotistical and self-righteous when clearly it's just defensive, and insecure. But, you can also look back and go, who failed? The editor who didn't take that piece.
Sure. Huh?
They failed because they didn't recognize that they had something of value, and it ended up landing somewhere else and doing well. And, I don't mean it in like a vindictive or revenge-oriented way, but it's a great experience as a writer when you submit something, get crushed, and then submit it elsewhere and have it do well, because it reminds you, it really was never about the piece. It was about the fit of the piece with that editor, that venue, that moment, and that you can't, that's one of the main pieces of advice I have for younger writers is, do not internalize rejection. Don't think that when somebody doesn't want a piece of yours, that it means something, fatal or enduring about your capabilities. It just means that that person, like got to fight with their teenager that morning, or isn't getting along with his wife, or like had a crappy lunch, or just published a piece that was too similar to your topic, or is overwhelmed with work, or there's a million things that are behind the curtain that we can't see, but we tend to, and social psychology shows us this, that when we succeed, we give ourselves too much credit. And when we fail, we give ourselves too much blame. The fact is, we're buffeted by all kinds of forces that are beyond our control. And the one thing you can control is your work. You do your work, you do it in a way that you have conviction and that you believe in. And then the rest of it is going to be whatever it's going to be. But if you start reverse engineering that and trying to figure out how to make your work satisfy all of these things that are beyond human ken, forget it. You'll lose your voice as a writer, and you also are less likely to figure out where you're going. It's better to have the satisfaction of doing work that you're proud of, and deal with the externalities as they come.
Sure. That makes perfect sense. And before we put a bow, it reminds me, so my day job for the last, 15-ish years, I'm a director for a medical device company, quality regulatory department. And what I preach on with everyone is that your process isn't bad just because you had one bad outcome to it. So you might have a great process, everything's working. We don't need to go start changing things because you had one bad product come out of a million. right? Like you keep doing the work, keep doing the right thing. Yeah, occasionally you might have something that comes out the way you don't want, but the mistake is overcorrecting all the time, is the taking every rejection as you got to start, I'm going to write a new genre or whatever I'm going to do is
Right.
you got to keep with it. Just make sure that try to believe in that process, that we mocked and then talked about it at length. But with what you believe in, what you're doing, keep believing in that, be mindful of it. You can always, tweak, adjust, but don't adjust just because of one, negative outcome to it, because there's always going to be negative outcomes. I think that's lovely you mentioned it, is that we always give ourselves too much credit and too much blame. So in trying to get that real headspace is very hard, because the world's all about us at all times.
Of course.
All of this talk about failure, I feel like I need a shot. So maybe then we can transition to our shots portion of the show here.
For 2 hours and now the shots start.
now we start the shot. So they're just rapid fire questions. You can drink or not. It's completely up to you if you want to drink per one. I'll have to pour myself another 2-bitch bourbon here, but to drink with you. But we'll answer them and we'll go through these, and then we'll get to the to whatever you're going to read us today.
Okay, my answer will be direct and efficient.
Very good. Okay, so first question. Worst question you've ever been asked in an interview, and what should I have asked instead?
Why did you make your daughters live in a wilderness setting where they could not hang around with other children? And what you should have asked instead is, what were the benefits to your children of growing up in a wilderness adjacent environment?
Very good. Very good. Turning that around. Have you ever witnessed anything inexplicable?
Every day, because I'm a parent.
Sure. It's funny that when I ask that to parents, you get a different answer. People that don't have kids yet. They're so like, oh yeah. And sometimes you'll get the Bigfoot or the UFO story, but you get parents who are like, oh shit, yeah, the whole thing's inexplicable.
Totally. Yeah, totally. I remember when I was about to have my first kid and I was reading all these books on like how to be a parent. And my buddies who had already had kids noticed that I was doing this, and they were like, "You're the dumbest son of a bitch who ever lived. Like, what in the world makes you think that you can read a book? It's just a sign of your absolute ignorance." And that turned out to be exactly right.
Yeah. It was very funny because now you read the book. Now everyone would just be like doing this on their phone. Because we were, I think it was, I forget what holiday it was. We were up with my parents, and my daughter was there with my granddaughter, Ellie. And Ellie loves to grab everything, So we joke, we have the 2 grandkids. We have Ellie and we have Juju. And we call Ellie Run Amok and Juju Wreak Havoc. So it's Run Amok and Wreak Havoc when they're gone. And she saw a caterpillar, and she goes and grabs a caterpillar, and she got a little splinter, like just a little splinter in her hand. And Cassie was having a hard time getting it out. And I was like, oh, you know what? Maybe just grab like a Band-Aid or something that's sticky, some tape, put it on there and just pull it. It'll probably just come right out. He goes, oh. And my wife's like, oh, yeah, I think that would work. And my wife's a nurse. I think that would work. I don't think that would work. And you look over and you see my daughter, Cassie, just on her phone. She goes, oh, yes. Google says that should, or she didn't say Google. She goes, yeah, they say that should work. And I'm like, okay, I guess the Google machine got it. So I guess you're good. Men with ponytails, nature's candy, or too hot to handle?
Oh, I think archaic and dispossessed. It's been over. This has been over for many, many years. I haven't cut my hair in 30 years, but it won't get any longer than this. But as my children often remind me, like, the whole hippie thing is dead and gone, buddy. You're just a walking statue. So I'm choosing the thighs. I notice you're
I
letting your
don't know how long mine's that,
I
but
appreciate it.
oh yeah. Oh, let's see. I don't know how mine's
But yeah, no, you're nowhere. You're nowhere. You need to cut that off tonight. Send me a picture tomorrow morning. I'm old, man. I got an excuse. You're young. You really got to clean up your act, man.
yeah. Well, the true story behind it is my son and I went and got our haircut right before all the lockdowns and stuff. And we're in California, so we had pretty severe lockdowns with COVID, right?
Yeah.
So like literally like the week before. And we didn't do it on purpose. We just needed a haircut. So we go to the barber, we get our haircut. It was he would usually shave it at that point, and mine would be very short. And so then, we're in the lockdowns and the hair's growing, and I'm like, okay, we need a haircut. My wife's like, I don't want you guys to go get to the barber yet. Okay, fine. I have a razor blade because I've shaved it before, just because I don't like to deal with it. So, and then my son used to be weird about going to the barber. So I'd shave his hair and just shave my hair and we're done with it,
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, I'll shave it. And it was getting a little longer. She's like, I kind of like it long. It gets curly actually when it starts to get long. I like that. You can keep it. So I'm like, okay, so I'll keep it. And I was like, you know what? Then I'll keep it until I can donate it. So I'll just wait. So if I'm going to stick with it, so I'll let it, grow out. I didn't realize that was, at first I thought it was 6 inches. It turns out it's 8 inches before you can donate it. And so at this point, you're pot committed, right? Like I just got this hair growing on me. And my wife's doing the same because she's done it before. Her and all of her daughters have donated before. I forget I'll try to link it up with the show, but it's they donate it to a cancer place that gives it to cancer patients, and it's for free. So there's a very particular one she likes to give it to, because they give it to the patients for free. So I was like, okay, I'll let it go. I'll let it go until when we get there. So 8 inches come, and by the time it hit 8 inches, I was just used to it. I just throw it like most morning, like almost at all times besides this show, because I shower before because I want to be like clean and beautiful for you. It's just in a ponytail.
Thank goodness. I think I made clear to you that I wouldn't talk with you otherwise.
Right. I mean, there was a lot of pretty nasty.
It's just common sense.
Awesome. So it'll be actually at some point this year. Well, the last part of that story actually was that we had a wedding to go to. A friend's supposed to get married. And that's supposed to have happened like probably a year ago at this point. So my wife was finally like, okay, you don't have to wait for the wedding anymore, Becca. Well, we can go cut her hair if you want. That's fine. So when I cut it, I was gonna do a nice send off to my hair for the show and everything when it comes. But and we'll see if it ever happens again. It is one of those things, once it gets to a certain length, it's just as easy as if it's short. Besides this freaking thing is curly and crazy. I don't know what the hell to do with myself.
Don't give up. Wait till you can contribute like 25 inches. That'll be good.
I'll do a couple of wigs,
There you go.
Finish the sentence. A Bigfoot, Chupacabra, and Jackalope walk into a bar. The bartender says,
which one of you is horny?
Love that. See, you can see the humorist there. I applaud you, sir. All right. James Joyce. It was all just a lark to see how much time people would spend reading this nonsense, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Most overrated writer in the history of literature. Yeah. It doesn't make a sense. And, the fact that they have Ulysses Day over there is just a sign that people will take any excuse to drink.
I was just reading this week, and to unveil the curtain here for anyone watching, that comment comes because I have a agenda I made out, a little guest letter I made out before I started the show, because I'm asking all these people to come on before I've ever recorded anything. And one of the things was, think of it like Hemingway and Joyce at the bar. just less pompous and incoherent.
Incoherent.
And so you had made a joke about that. And I just read this past week that there's a book club for Finnegan's Wake. And they've been going through one page of Finnegan's Wake per day per week for 25 years. And they're just about to finish. And I'm like, man, he has trolled you guys. Like, you don't really.
Unthinkable. I mean, nobody should read Finnegan's Wake. I mean, the concept of your podcast needs to be applied to some things outside of your podcast. Like, nobody should sit down and read a single page of Finnegan's Wake without drinking a bunch of whiskey first. There's no chance that it will make a lick of sense.
Right. All right. Oh, ranting about Joyce aside, last question for our shots here. If you were a mythological creature, what would you be?
You know, I hate to just be predictable, but I would obviously be a jackalope. I mean, it's the coolest, most charismatic, most iconic, most hilarious, most vicious, most kind, most beautiful little weird hybrid creature that the American West ever created. So I dream of being a jackalope. My every aspiration as an artist is to eventually become a jackalope. So yeah, I know that's not a surprising answer, but it's heartfelt.
Right. Very good. But it was a bit of gotcha journalism there.
Yeah,
Are you admitting then
like
that the jackalopes mythological?
Yeah. Well, right. Sure. You know, it just depends how you look at it. Some people like you who can't hold their liquor, they have a couple of drinks and suddenly they don't know the difference between reality and the imagination. So that's on you, man.
Very true. It is on me. Awesome. Well, thanks for that. So that maybe then we can get to whatever you'd like to read for us today.
Okay. Why don't you tell me how long you would like me to read, and I'll pick something that'll fit the bill.
So I think generally 2 5 minutes, kind of in that range is kind of best. If you want to read a little longer, I'm fine with all of it. I'm just going by what kind of fits the show the best. And it could be shorter. I mean, that's usually like poets will read a little shorter, but I think something like 2 to 5 minute range would be perfect.
Okay. Well, I don't have any essays that are super short, but I'll read you a really fun one that's about 8 minutes. Would that work okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. That's on the short end for my stuff. So I'm choosing this one in part because it's short, in part because it conveys a sense of the Great Basin Desert, and in part because we've talked a lot about humor. And, unlike most of my writing, which does try to either educate people about natural history or communicate something important about how they might rethink their lives, this one is just fun. And I've had so much fun with you tonight, Bill, that it seems like a good place to end, to just share a piece that I get. This is like, I don't know, if I were on the road, this would be Freebird. Like, everybody puts their lighters up and asks me to read this particular piece. And this is it's called A Visit from the Mary Kay Lady. And it's from my book, Rants from the Hill, which has the subtitle On Pack Rats, Bobcats, Wildfires, Curmudgeons, a Drunken Mary Kay Lady, and Other Encounters with the Wild in the High Desert. So this is a true story that will give you a sense of the human inhabitants of the landscape that I live in. And editors hate about my work that I always bury the lead. I never start where I should start. I always start somewhere else and then go sideways. So you writers will feel the pivot when I move sideways. So I'll share this with you as a way of wrapping up a really wonderful conversation with Bill, and as a way of expressing my gratitude for how much fun I've had in this conversation. Awesome. So this is called A Visit from the Mary Kay Lady, and it is gospel truth. It's unfortunate that we English speakers have relatively few words for mud, a substance that varies so greatly by location and conditions. It would be handier to have 100 terms for it, as the indigenous Nordic Sami people do for snow. If a word like ginormous can make it into the Oxford English Dictionary, you'd think they could spare an extra word or two to distinguish one person's home mud from another's. Out here in Silver Hills, Nevada, our mud is less a description of the ground than it is a full season, a marker of identity, and a way of life. Lacking 100 helpful synonyms for mud, I think instead of stories that suggest what's so special about the thick, deep, slippery gunk that we Silver Hillbillies call gumbo. When hiking during mud season in spring, the gumbo becomes so heavy on our boots that we often find it easier to shuffle along like cross-country skiers than to lift our heavy feet off the ground. When driving on even the slightest slope, it makes little difference whether you put your foot on the gas or the brake, since even while braking, you simply slide along without resistance like a capsule gliding through space. Our gumbo also has the unique quality of sticking to itself, gathering so thickly on truck tires that it's limited only by the wheel wells, which shear it off with each revolution, as neat as a spindle turning on a lathe. In early spring, the road to our house is sometimes so thick with gumbo that it becomes impassable, even to high-clearance four-wheel drive vehicles. When that happens, we have two choices: park at the paved road and slog several miles through the muck, or wait until evening, when the mud freezes up, making it viscous enough that it becomes possible to pilot perilously across it. In more than a decade out here, I have never completed a full mud season without sliding off the road, and our family now runs the gumbo pool. $5 buys you a guess as to the first date on which one of us, neighbors included, will end up in the ditch. But the best thing about mud season in Silver Hills is the gumbo luge, which my young daughters Hannah and Caroline absolutely love. Here's how it works. When the spring comes, the first dozen truck trips down our road leave shallow wheel ruts. Those ruts deepen a little each day, and by mid-season are so deep that it's risky to try to avoid them, since a slide into the ruts results in a jaw-rattling drop that's hard on spines as well as transmissions. Instead, the trick is to get squarely into these twin tire canyons from the start, after which the impressive depth of the channels unfailingly prevents the vehicle from sliding off the road. In fact, the ruts are so deep that you can drive our road without ever placing your hands on the steering wheel. Instead, you simply slide along, secure in the deep tracks that guide your rig even around hairpin turns. No true Silver Hillbilly would ever be caught with their hands on the wheel while running the gumbo luge, and in fact, it's common practice to lace your fingers behind your head while gunning your truck along through the muddy slots. And here's the pivot. One morning, during the height of mud season, I was sitting at my writing desk and looking out the window, which is about all I ever do at my writing desk, when I saw a spectacle so astonishing and surreal that I grabbed my birding binoculars to scope it out. There, in the twin tubes of the binocs, was a pink Cadillac, fishtailing wildly up our driveway. Now understand that in all my years on Ranting Hill, I had never seen a two-wheel drive vehicle out here during mud season, that our driveway is an unbroken, half-mile-long sheet of hazardous gumbo, and that the only pink things I've ever seen around here are rock penstemon, long-leafed phlox, and my kids' pacifiers. I instantly sprinted for the door, booted up, and headed out to see what would become of whomever was crazy enough to brave Silver Hills gumbo in a caddy. From the crest of the knoll beneath Ranting Hill, I witnessed an utterly indelible image. The pink Cadillac had gone sideways off our driveway, slid down a small hill, and lodged firmly atop a charred juniper stump, where it rested with its rear end up in the air and its wheels spinning madly, shotgunning mud everywhere. Covering my face with my forearm to deflect the gumbo strafing, I worked my way down to the car, which had music blaring from behind its tinted windows. I rapped on the driver's side window and waited for a reply. Eventually, the power window rolled down and Loretta Lynn came blasting out. Well, slow gin fizz works mighty fast when you drink it by the pitcher and not by the glass. In the driver's seat was a middle-aged woman who looked uncannily like Loretta, only frosted blonde. She held in her hand a highball glass from which she had apparently managed to spill not one drink of her cocktail. Rather than turning the music down, she instead held her pointer finger up as if to say, "Hold on a second," then took a sip of her drink and gunned the engine again. "Your tires aren't on the ground," I shouted over the cranking tunes, revving engine and splattering mud. "What's that, hon?" she yelled back. "Your tires," I screamed, pointing helpfully toward the part of her car that was 3 feet off the ground. She took another sip of her cocktail, leaned slowly out the window, craned her neck backward, and then began to laugh, reaching out to give me a fist bump, as if she had just slapped in the game-winning RBI. She then turned off the ignition and, in the silence that followed, said in a gravelly voice, "I'm the Mary Kay lady. Want a drink?" If she looked like Loretta Lynn, she sounded more like Tom Waits. Though it was 11 in the morning, I felt obliged not to let her drink alone, and so I promptly agreed. She spread her knees, reached down between her ankles, and pulled a thermos and a second highball glass from beneath the driver's seat, pouring me a tall one of something that tasted suspiciously like straight gin. "I came to invite you to a party," she said, "but I forgot the invitation. I don't want to get my heels muddy," she continued, pulling out her phone, "so let's just have a drink." She made a quick call, described roughly where she was, and instructed someone on the other end of the line to bring blush. We passed the next half hour pleasantly, she turning the Loretta back on and passing fresh drinks through the window, me standing up to my ankles in gumbo and receiving what I'm guessing were excellent tips about skincare. Just as we polished off the thermos, a large man wearing a huge hat came riding up our driveway on a ginormous horse. He dismounted with a wide smile, climbed down the hill, shook my hand firmly, then lifted the Mary Kay lady out through the window of the caddy, drink still in hand, gently folding her over his broad shoulder like a sack of grain. Clambering up the slope, he placed her on the horse, whose name, it turned out, was Blush. He then slid the pointed toe of his boot into the stirrup and swung himself up behind her, encircling her waist with his arms, and the two of them rode off together, laughing. I could see her clear plastic heels tapping Blush's flanks as the big man hollered back at me, "Thanks, Chief. See you after mud season." It took a few weeks for the gumbo to firm up enough for a tow truck to get in and winch out the abandoned car, during which I had the great pleasure of sitting at my writing desk, looking out at that beautiful pink wreck stranded down there among the gooseberry and rabbit brush. To commemorate the visit from the Mary Kay lady, whose name I never learned, I did what I think any eccentric, reclusive writer would have done. I composed a haiku. Light pink Cadillac, high centered on an old stump, wheels spinning freely. And there's a little story from the backcountry of Nevada. And thank you so much, Bill, for having me on the show. It's been a rare pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. Like I there's too much of that story that I like it top to bottom. And the fact that really happened. So what I've explained this to people before, that on the East Coast, people go, "Oh, what happens in Florida?" Right. It's kind of a joke, Florida. Right. And I would explain, like, Palmdale, Lancaster, we're like the Florida of like LA, like California, like whatever weird thing happens. Like there was literally one of the people that were that was a Power Ranger killed his buddy with his samurai sword in their apartment. So that's Palmdale. Like somehow the Power Ranger ends up in Palmdale, has a samurai sword and kills someone and goes to jail for murder. Because it's Palmdale. Yeah. Yeah, and I could see a drunken Mary Kay lady that would not spill her drink. Like she may have in fact like been my neighbor. Like
absolutely. She probably, emigrated to my neighborhood from yours.
She probably did. Awesome. Thanks so much for that. And so I like to say on the show, it's last call. You don't have to go home, but you'll have to restart the video. What my very last question I like to ask everybody is if there's one piece of not writing advice, it's life advice. Just anything you've learned over the years, small, big, what have you, life hack, whatever fancy term people are using. What's the one thing you would impart upon the people watching today that would make their life just a little bit better?
My first impulse is to say, don't take other people's advice. That's probably, maybe I should just leave it at that. Don't take other people's advice. Figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
At the bottom of my second drink, so I think that I'm almost out of advice. I have like a tiny bit.
That's very close. And I'm very close there too. Right. I don't know if you can even see that.
Keep going the wrong way. Clink. There we go.
Click.
No, but I do mean it seriously in terms of our conversation about writing process and about not defining your success by publication or by money. To be an artist of any kind, whether it's writing or in any other medium, you have to be self-motivated. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't have a drive to try to succeed in whatever success means to you. But you cannot judge what you do by externalities to the point where you get too discouraged. Just remember, there's always a difference between creativity and productivity. So productivity is, here's a list of all the fancy stuff I've done. That's not the same thing as being creative. Being creative is doing the work for your own reasons and finding satisfaction in it. And if you do that, then you really can't lose, because if you succeed in some external way, good for you. And if you don't, then that wasn't your primary motivation to begin with, and you haven't sold your soul, and you still know how to do your work. So don't give up. It's rough. Don't give up.
All right. Sure. No, that's lovely. And thank you so much for coming on. It's a complete honor. I had a great time. It's and I mentioned to you earlier in a section we're going to cut because it was just making a new drink, section. But every one of these shows I feel the better for. I really mean that genuinely. I think everyone has something to offer, and it's, even though it's virtual, it's really special for me to get 2 hours of someone's time. And we're just here, we're just, and partially maybe because it's virtual and there's no one even around us buzzing around, no crazy Mary Kay ladies, buzzing by for us to focus. And I cherish every one of them. I truly appreciate it. And thank you so much for being here.
But my pleasure. I feel the same way about you, Bill. It's been so fun to connect, and really fun that you found me through my friend John Lane, the writer John Lane, whose episode is already up. And I just want to say that I probably would not be a writer without John Lane. He's been not only a friend, but a mentor to me. He's just an amazing writer and an amazing person. So if you're listening to this episode and you haven't yet listened to the earlier episode in which Bill has a conversation with John, I definitely recommend John Lane's work to you, and also recommend Bill's podcast and his conversation with John to you. And it's been super fun. And let's hope we can get together again sometime.
So, do I have anything? Wait, I need to do a final cheer, so I have to have at least a little bit. I didn't pour this on camera. I'm gonna pour the little horsey guy.
Okay, wait. I'm out of booze, so I got to do it too. Hold on.
Okay, no problem. Take your time.
Every interview should be as lubricated as this one was. Cheers.
Cheers.